You're listening to the Gender Reveal Party podcast. I'm your host, Jay Pryor. This isn't your usual gender reveal party. There will be no baby sex parts. This is the real reveal, where we reveal gender through stories of brave humans willing to share their lived experience. Enjoy the listening. I sure enjoy making it. Welcome back to the Gender Reveal Party. I'm your host, Jay Pryor, and today I have, and I'm so excited about this guest. And Pegah and I, we don't really know each other very well, and we know it, and yet we know a lot of the same people, right?
Yep.
So you're here in Lawrence, Kansas with me, and you turns out my assistant Darlene and you were friends, and we were talking, and she mentioned that you have a couple of Theybies.
Yes.
Is the name I call them Theybies. Is that what you call them? But Theybies?
You know, I've never considered that term, but I love it. I've always just said these are my babies, but
Yeah.
I like babies.
Right, they're your babies and they're Theybies. So,
That's
and I am so delighted to have this conversation with you because I think it's so brave. So I'm just going to shut up for a minute and let you tell the story as much as if you want to share. And then I'm dying. I have quite so many questions, but I want to shut up and just let you introduce yourself and welcome to the Gender Reveal Party. And thanks for being here.
Absolutely. So I'm Pegah Naemi Jimenez, she, her pronouns. I had my first live birth at 2 years ago now with my firstborn Rumi. And then just about 11 weeks ago, I had my second born, Arya. And before we had our kids, I had a very serious conversation with my husband that I don't want my kids to feel like they have to perform gender in an expected way.
Yeah.
That they have to express themselves in an expected way, that they have to fit into a certain role in an expected way. We have now learned that our sex assigned at birth does not relate to our gender identity development, and it also does not relate to our gender expression. And all of that is also separate from our sexual orientation. And I want my kids to just know that from day one, it's all okay. Wow. All pronouns are okay. How you want to express yourself is okay. And, and I just wanted to be able to support them from the beginning versus seeing some sort of shift when they're however old and then being like, is there something we need to talk about? I just why do I have to start then? Why can't I just start it from the day that they're born?
Wow.
So
how did he take that call? How did that conversation go with him?
You know what? I wouldn't have picked a partner if I thought it wasn't going to go well. Right. So, AJ did it with such grace. He said, yeah, that makes sense to me. And we didn't know how we were going to do it. And we didn't know quite what it was going to look like. And we were just going to give each other grace and give the people around us grace and just go for it. Nice. And that was, I will say that when we, in utero, I did want to know what the sex of our babies were. And that really came from, I experienced some pregnancy losses before Rumi. And I just wanted to know everything I could about my babies. I wanted to know, I just wanted to know. Mm-hmm. There's something about pregnancy with loss that right. For me, there was a certain amount of, elements of surprise that I didn't want. And that was one of them. Right. I just want right. to be able to imagine everything.
Right.
But yeah. When we knew, we didn't tell anybody. We didn't tell anybody the sex of the baby. And this drove everyone crazy.
Oh, I bet.
It drove our families crazy. The whole question was boy or girl. And what I really wanted to tell people is you don't care about my baby's gender identity, you care about my baby's genitals. And that's weird.
Right? Isn't that weird? I don't know if you've seen my show, but that's the whole thing is that it's not a gender reveal party, it's a genital reveal party. And that's weird.
It's totally weird.
Totally weird.
The only people that need to know about my baby's genitals are me and my husband and the pediatrician. I mean, that's it.
Thank you.
They're the only people who need to know.
Right.
because it doesn't matter. It
Right.
doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
So
What kind
when
of pushback did you get? Like what, like, did you,
oh my just constant, like, just tell me if it's a boy or a girl. Just tell me so I know what kind of clothes to get. So I know what kind of toys to get. And I'm like, that's exactly why I'm not telling you.
yes, it's
Because
exactly why I'm not telling you.
I
Whole
don't
point.
yes, I don't want people to get bogged down by colors or clothing or toy. Like, who
It's like
cares?
people can't relate to this child if they don't know what it, it's like that's how we must relate to. That isn't, isn't that fascinating? It's like we
It's
have to know what your genitals are so we know how to treat you. And
yes.
that's my point. It's like, why can't you just treat it like a child? Like, let's care for it and love it and take care of it.
And this kind of goes into how I mean, this goes even, it's deeper rooted, right? So when we talk about like trans folks, a lot of the question is, well, how did they transition? Did they have top surgery? What are their genitals now? Are they, and I'm like, no, that's none of your business
Thank
because
you.
nobody comes up to me and says, what's in your pants?
Right.
So if so we're starting that from day one. I mean, and then
Yeah.
that's what it was. I'm like, let's just start that from day one. We've never asked what our genitals were, what are this look like, what are that look like. If I'm going to share that with you, there's a intimacy that goes along with that we're going to consent to. I haven't consented to any of that, and I'm not right now. I have to consent for my kids, and I'm not consenting to that.
God, I love you so much. I love this so much. And I'm so inspired by you. And my vision for the world are all parents like you. So I mean that's my hope for the world. It's so amazing to me. Tell me now, because you've had your second child, right?
Yeah.
So the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the family, they're used to this now. And I hope. Have we
Oh,
shifted? Was it the second pregnancy different? Like what did that look like?
we didn't treat it any differently. We kept to we're not telling anybody what the sex of our baby was going to be. The day that Aria was born and we did our announcement, we never used any pronouns besides they, them. And we just said the baby's name. And our parents were messaging and they were like, oh, boy or girl. And it was like, that's not the point. Like, ask us how the baby's doing. Ask us how I'm doing. I had a completely unmedicated birth. Like, how am I doing? I would like that question.
Right?
Um,
Yeah.
and it was hard. So, interestingly, Arya is a Persian name. It's an Iranian name. That's my background. I'm Iranian. And when I had told my mom that that's what I wanted to name the baby, she was like, well, Arya is a boy's name. You can't name a girl Arya. And I said, I can name my baby whatever I want.
Right. Yeah.
But and I'm like, and you can think whatever you want about the baby based on what I'm naming them.
Right.
But it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And is Rumi considered a male name?
So Rumi is also considered, yeah, it's also an Iranian name and it's also considered a male name. And then I had to say to my mom, I'm like, Beyonce's baby girl is named Rumi. So really it just doesn't matter. Like
Right.
these names are just names. We've given it meaning. We've given
Exactly.
it gender. But otherwise, names are genderless. Clothing is genderless. Toys are genderless.
Colors are genderless.
Yep.
And if you go back in the history of gender, the pink and blue used to be swapped.
Yep.
Right. Pink used to be a color for men. And, it used to be like that. And it's ridiculous.
It gets into a bigger, a topic of it's really about capitalism and
it's 100% about capitalism.
right?
Yes.
It's about baby clothes
Yes.
and selling products and selling all of these things. It has nothing to do with the baby's sexual, sex identity, or gender. I'm gonna grab Aria. You'll all get to see Aria.
Yay! I'm excited. So those of you who are watching and actually while you're doing that, I'll mention our sponsor. So we have a sponsor now. It's fireandbliss.com. Fire and Bliss Creative is our sponsor. And they are curators of art and supporters of artists that are all Black and Indigenous people of color and or LGBTQ or queer. So I don't know if you ever get art Pegah or think about buying art. But sometimes I think it's hard to find places or know when we're supporting artists that, we want to be supporting. Look at that baby. Oh my God. Those of you who are listening are going to want to go to the YouTube channel just to meet Aria because that baby. Oh my goodness. Look at that. Beautiful child.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. And it's anyway, so let me finish. Fireandbliss.com. If you go to fireandbliss.com/reveal, you can see the collection that I created, and you can use the word reveal as a coupon for 20% off your first purchase, which is amazing. Go support queer and Black and Indigenous people of color artists. I also want to mention our Patreon page. I've decided to create a Patreon page for just people who are my fans, and I'm going to do extra content. We're having a discussion about it, which is the next thing I want to talk to you about, Pegah. We're gonna have a conversation about it because I'm not really willing to have that big conversation necessarily with all the trolls out there. But for my patrons, we can really get into this conversation. It's an interesting phenomenon that the Gen Z generation, I think they've got this, a lot of them have this already, right? And they've got it figured out because they're not going to buy into the gender stuff. And they're reclaiming this word it almost as a gender, which is, for people my age, they can't deal with themselves around it. It's really hard. But that lends to this idea that, isn't it fascinating how here you are in your own family? So these people you've got 2 children now that they are used to this, you'd think by now. And they're clearly not, because it's so trained into them. And that's the thing that's so fascinating about it. And then we could go another layer deeper with you, because the Iranian culture, I would assert, probably, right, is much more, even more binary than, your average waspy white American. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, I think this is also connected to language. So in Farsi, there are no specific pronouns. Like, we don't have he, him, she, her pronouns in our
Cool.
language, or they, them, but everything is still very binary. So like girl and boy, man and woman is still a very strong, those traditional values and all of those things are very strong rooted in many ways. So even just finding how to talk about this and being, gender neutral, because there isn't words in our language for that, has been challenging in some ways just for that. And then when I think about their dad's background, he's Mexican American, and even in Spanish language, right? Like, it's very highly masculine, feminine in language.
Right.
So it becomes, when in Spanish, when his family wants to say something in Spanish about the kids, do we use L or there are those questions, and it's like, oh gosh, we're having these language barriers to some degree as to why we don't need to use either, and learning how can we create that within our languages now.
Right.
To have a broader gender spectrum in these more, in these different languages. And I think that's been really interesting for us to navigate too.
Yeah. So how do you get from, like, you're a cis woman in a heterosexual relationship, and yet you have the consciousness that you do. Like, and you're Iranian and you're in Kansas. Let's be clear. The odds of this are not this is not that you wouldn't be going down a normal path. Tell me you're not a usual path. I don't, you like the word normal.
Yes. Well, I identify as a queer person. Before my husband and I were together, I was previously married to a cis woman. So part of that is probably where my consciousness comes from, is I also don't fit into that sort of, I do consider myself part of the LGBT community. But when you're with one person who identifies as a certain gender or another, people have their,
right. And that's on me, though, that I shouldn't have assumed that, right? Because that's something I try not to assume that about people, because I know a lot of people who are queer who happen to be in a heterosexual relationship that it seems binary, but but they're queer. So that's, I apologize for my assumption too.
No worries. But I also think that queer identity is a politic, right? Like it's
I
not
was just talking about that. Yeah.
it's not just about who I'm sleeping with and what I don't like to say preference because it's not preference, it's who I am. But it's really about how I see the world. And I see the world as being flexible and being not on one end or the other all the time.
Yeah.
If there aren't shades of gray, then we're going to lose a battle of humanity. I mean, honestly, we
Great.
have to be able to say things are changing,
Right.
times changing, language is changing,
Right.
and we can't just hold on to these concrete things that we learned once upon a time. We have to be able to adapt with how all of those things are coming into our consciousness. And I have to be one of those folks. I'll share. My toddler now, Rumi, likes to watch the show Bluey. It's an Australian on the Australian public access. It's really great. It's about healers, the dogs, and it's this family. And Bluey is, as you might imagine, the color blue. And they have a sibling, Bingo, who's like a brownish color. And for the longest time, because of my own cultural ingration of what gender is, I thought Bluey was a boy because of them being blue, and come to find out that it's supposed to be a girl. So like I'm not immune to this either,
Oh,
right?
tell me. Yes. Oh no, it's the water we swim in, right? And you're changing the water.
Exactly.
That's the cool thing, is like you are changing the water, and that's why I'm so inspired by you.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to. So I think the hardest part about all of this for me is when I come across like a stranger and they're like, boy or girl, right? And this is supposed to be a 30-second interaction.
Right.
This is not supposed to be a long
But it's
interaction.
people's first interaction.
Yes.
It's
yes.
the very first thing. That's how I try to get this. Why I think these conversations are so important is because how intense people are about gender. Like, so much so that, they'll kill trans people. Right. And that the very first conversation they have with you is the very first words out of their mouths sometimes, right? Is boy or girl.
Boy or girl. And I struggle with that because I'm like, I'm never going to see you again. And the labor that I have to now make this 30-second interaction,
right,
a 5-minute interaction is a lot.
Right.
So I struggle sometimes with, do I say, well, we're letting our kids tell us what their gender is when they come to that. So this is just my baby, and tell them their name, or do I just give them some sort of pronoun so it makes them feel better and then move on? And I struggle with that, and I don't always do that very well. But that's I would say strangers are the hardest part, not my family.
I mean, agree. No, I totally get this. And I want to share something with you that somebody shared with me a couple of years ago that really helped unlock me, because, I've always seen it like, if I'm not out, they die. Like if I like, it's my job, like I was a suicidal youth. And once I survived that, I was like, I have to make this different. Nobody else is doing this. Right. So I've been out here doing this for 35 years, and I'm in this training. Right. And, it's a training for GLSEN, and they're talking about gender exercise. And they talk about like, how do you perform gender at work versus at home? And how do you, like all these different, ways of your gender expression. And I noticed that when I'm going to go talk to a CEO, or I'm going to go do a business conversation, I'm not going to correct them on my pronouns. I don't have the energy to correct them on my pronouns. Number one. Number two, like, I'm not here for that. Like, we're here to talk about their business. I'm here to serve them. I'm here to like be a good coach. I'm here to be a good consultant, right? It's not what we're here to talk about. And I'm committed to being out all the time. Yeah. So I noticed that when I'm with a CEO, it's like, I'm not going to put on nail polish, and I'm not going to do the things. And I started to feel like a little shame and guilt. Like I had a little shame and guilt spiral. I went into a shame spiral, like, whoa, and so this leader, his, brilliant leader, says to me, Jay, you don't always have to do the emotional labor, right? It is not always your job to be out there, especially in a situation where it's not going to serve anything to get into that. Right. And so I just want to give you the same grace I hope you'll give yourself, because like, whatever it is and however you respond, I hope you don't make yourself wrong, because it really helped me to just be like, yeah, man, that's not what I'm here. And it's okay for me to not always have to be the one. Right? I don't always have to be the one. It feels like I do sometimes. And I so appreciate that. Sounds like you feel that way.
And like you said before, Jay, is, I think there are parents who are wanting to do this and are trying to figure out and navigate how to do this with their kids and are still figuring it out, because this is, we're all going to be figuring it out.
Yeah.
But I think it's because I don't have that many people who are actively trying to do it in the same way that we are, that it does become a little bit more exhausting.
It does. It does.
To think about those things. There was one time, bless you, there was one time when, I had to say to our family, I'm like, if you want to get the kids clothes now, but this was at a point when Rumi was older, and I was letting them know what we needed. And I'm like, don't be afraid of color. Like, get whatever colors you want. Like, it's okay. Color has no gender. Like, I promise. Rumi will wear pink and wear it well. Rumi will wear black and wear it well. And, at this point, some of our family does know what their genitals are. And so it is a little bit ingrained. If they've changed a diaper or so, they see what the genitals are. And so I do see that, because they know that. As much as I might say, like, don't worry about this, we'll get, certain colors all of the time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish you never saw anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish you never knew, because then you wouldn't know any better.
Right. And it's almost impossible to, because it's so much the water we swim in. It's so, I mean, when we had ours, they came to us already, gendered.
Oh, sorry.
And everywhere we went, we also, at the time, and this was back in, my kids were born in 2009 and 10. We got them in 2011, 12. Okay. But by that time, like when we'd walk into a store, it was pink or blue.
Yeah.
You didn't have a choice. Now I'm grateful to see that, there are more gender neutral options, and there's gender creative kids, and we're starting to see this kind of stuff as now. I mean, Florida just is trying to pass a bill now, and the governor is supporting it, that people are not allowed to it's called don't say gay. It's a don't say gay policy, which is, you'd think would be like, oh, don't say gay like you're so gay. No, it's don't speak of LGBTQIA in any form to elementary age kids. We're just not allowed to have that conversation, because it's not age appropriate, as though there's something obscene about not identifying with the gender that you were, or the sex you were assigned at birth. So, and that's how they're doing it, is like they're literally eliminating the words trans and taking those out of it to make it like, we don't even exist. It's fascinating, right? What's happening. Yeah. And I assert that that's a response to the global conversation that is moving our way.
I 100% agree with you on that, right? It's like what we're dealing with is, how do we create, and this is what becomes really hard, is how do we create policies to continue to marginalize? And how do we do it in such a way to say that it's actually beneficial or saving or doing something that's positive, when these policies are doing nothing but hurting people, possibly killing people, right?
Yeah.
And people say, we've seen those memes where it's like, say using my pronouns is actually saving my life, those types of sentiments, because it truly is, but making people more and more invisible, that is literally going to kill people.
Right. Yeah.
I worry about that with my kids. Like, I don't ever want them to feel shame if using a certain pronoun feels good to them, but having been raised to, be a part of a certain gender role or a certain gender identity, and then that takes them even that much longer to be who they are, or to tell them they are. Like, I want to know, I want to use whatever pronouns they want me to use, but they're just not there yet. They're not there.
And I promise it won't take long, because every trans kid I know knew, like the ones that have had parents listen to them, by the time they were 3 or 4, they had that figured out.
Exactly.
I was stuffing, and for me, it's interesting because, I I was putting pants in my socks when I was 4 and calling myself my brother's name. And I was wearing my shirt off and, all the whole, and I'm really grateful that there was enough. It's interesting the way it worked, because at the time it was like, once I identified as queer, then there was, fortunately at the time, there were butches that I got to introduce, got to know or got to see that as modeled for me as an identity. And that's another thing I still want kids, because I feel like we went this way of, if you're a tomboy, that must mean you're trans and you want to transition, right? And that's not everybody, right? And if somebody had told me that I could have gone on a low dose testosterone and taken my chest off back in the day, I'd have done it. I'd have been there, right? And then I wouldn't have gone through 18 years of undercover white guy. And now, I mean, I am grateful because I have an experience that most humans don't have, right? Having walked through that world as undercover white guy for 18 years and seen the level of sexism and all the things. But had I had a choice back then that humans do now that identify as non-binary, it would have been a different path for me. And I want to make sure that everybody knows that there isn't just, you have to choose he or she, right? You can choose they. They can choose, they can decide that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can choose to identify with either gender or none at all.
Or none at all. And that's the whole conversation of like, I don't actually identify as male or female. That doesn't even make, I mean, it's like, or man or woman, actually. I identify as female, but man or woman, I don't identify with either one. Exactly. Butch, got it.
Exactly. Yes. And I think that's where, when I think about like, we have to be flexible, I think that's where it comes from for me, is we're all still trying to figure this out. Like, part of it is just, you're like, how do you explain every nuance of who you are and your identity, right? Like, I don't know if I can necessarily put my queerness into words. And that was really hard for me.
Sure.
Like, I knew that I wasn't just attracted to one gender, but I didn't know how to express that as a young person in my teens. And I had no other LGBT person who was out around me, and I was in a Middle Eastern family.
Right.
I couldn't say anything. And that became really confusing for myself, because I'm convincing myself that I just like have to like men.
Yeah.
And then when I was, out of the house and on my own and starting to allow myself be myself, people still wanted, they wanted me to say then, was I lesbian or was I bisexual? And that felt wrong. But yet here I am saying one thing or the other, coming out in certain ways, and it never felt quite right. Because I just think it's, that spectrum is fluid. And I think if we just start to teach that gender is fluid, this can be easy.
And so is sexuality. Sexuality is fluid. If people had the choice and were allowed to have the freedom to express themselves both sexually and gender expression wise, it's all fluid.
Yes.
I mean, I think about this with butches, as a baby butch, there's still, if I'm around there's certain women, they're not all straight, they're not all queer women, but most of them are. I have a vibe for a femme queer woman that when I'm around a femme, I can there's something that, a butch stands up straighter, and that's not about you could put it into a binary box if you want to. We both have vulvas, so it's a different conversation. And so it's so nuanced. There's so much that if we could just let people have some grace and be fluid about it. And the rigidity is fascinating to me. And what I know about, I'm also a life coach and I'm a metaphysician, and I know that what we resist persists, and that rigidity is resistance. And so that, those of us that are learning to let ourselves be fluid and to embrace fluidity, we'll override resistance, right? Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, and I'm hoping that as my kids get older, they'll sense that and feel that, because that's what's important to me. Is it's the rigidity that I'm most fearful of. I'm fearful that they'll think that they have to have certain jobs, or they'll have to like certain things, or they'll have to, and that is what I'm trying to break, that barrier, right? It's like, when people say like, give a girl a science kit, and I'm like, why weren't we doing, like, why is that like a new thing? Like,
Right.
shouldn't we have been doing that from the get? Like, what does that say about us that
Right.
we're now trying to make STEM, science sets in pink for girls? Like, why would that have mattered?
Right.
We should,
Right.
we should have
Give
been
all of them science sets and see who
exactly,
likes them. Right.
exactly. Like, just let's let our kids be exposed to all of the things,
Yeah.
and see what they like, and
Right.
let that be okay
Yeah.
without what we think they should like.
And I will tell you, I just did a podcast of, because I'm going to be coming on and telling stories. And one of the things that always interested me was, did the world perceive me as masculine, or did I feel that way? Which came first, right? Because when I was a baby, I was bald headed, and my mom would have to put a bow on my head because people assumed that I was a boy.
Yes.
Just automatically said, what a cute little boy. Every time they saw me, what a cute little boy. And she got mad about it. So she put a pink bow on my head every time she took me out, so people would know I was a girl. Right.
Yeah.
My first jobs were, my niece and I both were the first girl carryouts at a grocery store. Then my niece went into the stereotypical female jobs as checkers, or at the, working out. They kept me in stocking shelves with all the guys. Like, I became a cook at the first Pizza Hut we had, where all the other girls got hired as waitresses. Like, my whole life, that kind of stuff happened. People treated me, boys flirted with my nieces, teased them in a way that was like they wanted their attention. I always say they hurt me, didn't flirt with me, because they treated me like another guy, right? Yeah. Happened my whole life. So it's weird that even when I'm trying to be shoved into the binary and shoved into how I'm supposed to be, the rest of the world got it. Right? It's interesting.
Yeah. It is interesting. So my background, I'm a social psychologist by training. And one of the things that, that I would study in my research is this idea of cultural psychology, that we do not live in a vacuum, right? Our culture has been very influential of what we do, our behaviors, how we respond in social settings, what we might do in social settings. And it is a lot of, it's kind of like that idea of what came first, the chicken or the egg. It's cyclical. Like, there is no what came first, right? We're in this this sphere of being so influenced by our culture, and our culture dictating to us how we should think and feel and what we should do, that it becomes really hard to really determine, like, what is all mine, and does that even really exist? Because you could even argue my whole sentiment of trying to raise my kids to reveal their own gender at some point is this new cultural thing,
right? Of course.
And I'm being influenced by that, right?
Right.
And taking that in. So I think it's really important to me that we recognize that when we just take a step back. It's the same idea of like recognizing our biases and how our biases are influencing how we see the world, and
constantly
people, and what, it's me thinking Bluey, this dog, is a boy because it's blue, right? Like,
right. Me assuming that you're a straight person because you're married to a dude.
Exactly.
And like all of that. It's so permeates our being.
It completely permeates our being. It's so inherent to like just because we want to understand the world in ways, right? We want to take something really complicated and simplify it. Yeah. And I think that's why we like categorizing. This is why kids within I think it's ages 18 to 24 months can categorize gender really well. And then I say gender, but what I should say is sex. They categorize sex really well, right?
Right.
Because they've seen what that should look like physically now, and they're able to do that. And that's very cultural, right? Like if we had done that differently, then we would all have learned that differently. Like if we
Yep.
didn't have that binary to start with, we would have done that very differently to start
Exactly. And I call it my show, I call it classic female training,
with.
because I was classically trained female.
Yeah.
I'm very well trained. Midwest, I'm Midwest woman trained.
Yes, exactly.
I can feed a herd of people and take care of a bunch of people and, never sit down. I
Yes.
can do all of it.
The best caretakers, right? The best
Absolutely. Know so many recipes with Campbell's creamy mushroom soup. It's not funny. So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So, I don't know. I have hope for
I have
the
a lot of hope.
to come, because I really hope, like you said, maybe at some point more and more parents will just kind of adopt this approach and feel, have the courage. It does take courage, because the looks that we get, like, just tell me if your kid's a boy or a girl. I will say, when we took Rumi to daycare, telling the teachers and explaining that to the teachers, it wasn't a struggle in the sense that the teachers were like, "Oh no, I'm not going to do that," but I could just sense the nervousness
Right.
and how often they corrected themselves, when they used a certain, because you're checking what your baby's sex is all the time on these forms.
Right.
So you see that, and so then they have a certain gender pronoun that comes with that. And I'm
Right.
like, we say them at home, but we're fine with whatever pronouns you use, as long as, and I said this to them, I'm like, as long as you don't correct people to say that they are the gender you think based on their sex. That was most important to me.
Right.
I never wanted people to be like, to call Rumi or Arya a boy or a girl and have someone correct them. I'm like,
Right.
no, it doesn't matter. If
Right.
you already used he, him, or she, her pronouns, let's just go with it. I'm not going to correct you. I don't need anyone to correct you. It's fine. Let's just go with it.
Yeah.
And we'll correct it and we'll change it when our babies tell us. And
Right.
I just use they, them in the process.
Right.
And that was really interesting. They just kind of struggled and went back and forth with that. But they're using it in the classroom, and that's pretty awesome to me. So
That is awesome. And my child, for example, like I've been practicing, because my child is non-binary and uses all the pronouns.
mhm.
And I've been practicing switching up like he, she, they in one paragraph. Like if I can do that, right? Because
Yeah,
the reality is my kid doesn't care. Like it's
yeah,
like I don't care. And that's
yeah.
how I feel. Like they is the most accurate for me. And when
Mhm,
someone uses they, it feels the best to me. But
mhm,
I also did, obviously present as a masculine human. And
mhm.
so I get that you see me and you see he, and that's okay with me. I just don't want to make a thing about it. Like, I don't care. Like I just don't. And the thing for me that's interesting, especially again about strangers, is how interesting, strange. It's so weird how people just tell you things and assume things. But it's when people want to argue with me or talk to me about, talk me out of my pronoun or not, like it's a very strange thing how people can get bunched up. I told a guy one time when I was considering going off testosterone, that's a whole long story, but I went off testosterone for a lot of insight for myself and my knowing of myself and who I am. And most authentic expression would be to go off testosterone. But I was telling a guy about the results of that would be, at the time, they told me that I would keep all the hair on my body, like it would stay. And I
Okay.
was a very hairy man. I'm Scottish, like very hairy. And so I was joking that I would get my hips and my lady butt back. And so I'd be a hairy hippie, a hairy hippie, senior or something. And
Right.
this guy, the really straight guy, was so mortified. He was like, don't ever do that. He was like, that's disgusting. Like it just
Wow.
freaked out his world that I
Wow.
could even joke about being a hairy hippie bearded lady, weirdo. And I'm like, well, not for
Well,
me. That's who I am.
exactly. Well, it doesn't fit our expectation, right?
Right.
Especially in Western culture, we're supposed to be women traditionally are supposed to be hairless unless
Right.
hair on your eyebrows and
Yeah.
your head, right? I don't shave my armpits. I rarely shave my legs. I know when I raise my arms, people take a double take. I know exactly, it's like, I don't care
You don't
because
care.
I don't want to shave my armpits all the
Right.
time.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's hair, it grows there. I am a
Right.
human and humans grow hair in different places,
Yeah.
but it doesn't fit the expectation is
Yeah.
really what it comes
And
down to.
that's the thing that again that we have a lot of hope for, and where I feel like you are changing the water that we swim in again by changing the expectation, right?
Yes.
I mean, people are gonna have to around you deal with themselves a little bit. And so I appreciate the fact that you are so willing to do this and be a stand for us as a fellow queer, and that you put yourself out there. You're putting yourself out there constantly. So I just appreciate your bravery and appreciate your courage and your stand, right? It's a huge stand. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate
Very
that. I mean, like I said, it's hard, but we've got to do it because it's who we are, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't be anyone different if I wasn't going to be that person who's like, I'm not going to lead this charge, but I'm going to be a part of it.
Right.
I have 2 small kids to be a part of. I can't be that full on activist, but I'll be a part of the journey.
Yeah.
And being part of that journey is starting with my own kids and starting with my own friends and my own family and within my own community.
Blessings. And so where can we find you? You do write about this, right? Some, right? And so will you tell our listeners and watchers how we can get in touch with you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I talk a lot about this on my IG account. My handle is just Naemi, Naemi. I also have an account called The Unapologetic Parent on Instagram as well. Hi, baby. Do you want to have a handle too? The Aria show, huh? So those are my main 2 things that I work at. I also am a doula in the Lawrence community.
Cool.
So my group, or what I call myself, is the Rainbow Collective Doula. And I help people bring their babies into the world, or if they choose that pregnancy is not for them, helping them to find ways to gain abortion access as well.
Good. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, that's a part of my birth justice is we all either, if you want to have a baby, let me help you have that baby. And if you don't want to have a baby, let me help you find a way to support that as well.
Yeah.
That my birth work is full spectrum in that sense.
Nice.
So I'm also that person. So if you are having a baby, that's me. I particularly focus on LGBTQ folks and BIPOC folks, because again, when we think about respect and dignity when we're having babies, a lot of that has to do with our identities too.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that not only are you being supported as who you are and what your family looks like within a very traditional medical complex system, I also want to make sure that people are enjoying just birthing in general and feeling safe in their birthing process. So
nice.
That's my doula work. So
well, I appreciate you so much.
Yeah.
You're giving me so much hope for the next generation and changing the water we're swimming in. And you're right here in Lawrence, Kansas. So I'm gonna see you soon. I'm pretty sure. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you, Aria, for being on the show. That baby. Oh my goodness. And blessings and thank you for your work.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really great.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for listening to the Gender Reveal Party podcast. I hope you loved it. And if you did, would you take a second and go do all the things like subscribe, rate, review, tell all your friends. Apparently, if you do that, the podcast platforms are more likely to share it. And if you think these stories are important, please take 3 minutes to just go do that. I'd really appreciate it. Also, I'd love to connect with you on social. On Instagram and Facebook, I'm at the Gender Reveal Party, and on Twitter, I'm at Pryor J. It's a real joy and privilege to bring you this podcast. Come back soon. Love you, bye.